We're joined on the line by Nile Gardiner. He's director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. His key areas of specialization include Iran and other rogue states. Nile, thanks so much for joining the Ben Shapiro Show. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks very much, Ben.
So, Nile, what do you make of Iran's activity here? Why are they doing this? Obviously, they don't want to go to full-scale war with the United States, because if they do, we will crush them in relatively short order. So what exactly are they doing?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's certainly a very dangerous game that Iran is playing right now. I think that this latest, act of saber-rattling from Tehran is very much about the domestic political situation, the rising unrest within Iran, the deep unpopularity of the Iranian regime with the Iranian people. After all, I think the U.S. policy of maximum pressure, the very deep-seated sanctions in place, are having a real impact on the Iranian economy. There is growing, I would say, unhappiness among the Iranian people with the regime in power. You've got soaring inflation, rising unemployment. You have an economic disaster really on the horizon for Iran. And so there's a very big domestic component here, which is often seen with dictatorial regimes. They try to deflect attention away from economic problems through sort of flag-waving nationalism. And I think this is part of it. At the same time as well, I think it's an act of sort of bravado by Iran, sending a message that they are prepared to, flex their muscles, use some military force, and the recent tanker attacks, for example, on Saudi shipping, on Japanese shipping, Norwegian shipping, and so on. This is an example of that. So I think there are many motives here, but I have to say that you are dealing with a very reckless regime, which is playing with fire right now, because if they decide to escalate things further, then I think that there's a very strong prospect of U.S. retaliation.
Well, given the fact that there may be retaliation, there's been a media attempt to suggest that any sort of retaliatory action by the United States results in all-out, full-scale war. I don't really see why that's the case. Back in the late 1980s, obviously, the Iranians did exactly the same thing. The United States in one day effectively wiped out most of the Iranian Navy. And that was basically the end of Iran messing with us for about 30 years here. So why is there this weird idea in the media that if the United States acts at all, that it's going to involve, 100,000 ground troops suddenly marching into Tehran?
Yeah, I think that's really unrealistic. I think the Trump administration certainly has no intention of a large-scale war against Iran, but I think the administration is fully prepared to do whatever is necessary in order to deter Iranian aggression and to send a clear warning message to Iran that that they are playing a very dangerous game. So I do think that if we see U.S. military action, it will be limited in nature. But I think right now I don't sense the president wants to engage in a conflict with Iran. But the ball is in Iran's court, and if the terrorist dictatorship in Tehran is foolish enough to pick a fight, they're going to lose that fight very heavily. And I think that I would have thought that the Iranian leadership understands that. But we are dealing though with people who sort of live though in a parallel universe in many respects, and who are supremely arrogant in Tehran, and who believe that they can get away with anything. So after all, I mean, they were dealing with the Obama administration for several years, and they did get away with an awful lot. So, but it's a different game now with the Trump administration in power. They're not into the appeasement mindset that you had with Obama. It's a very different sort of ball game here.
Well, speaking about that, we're speaking with Nile Gardiner over at the Heritage Foundation, and he's the head of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. Nile, it seems like, as I have said, the administration is sending mixed signals on what exactly is going to happen here. Obviously, they're sending no signals that appeasement is on the table. The president seems at some points to be acting more militaristic. At other points, he has suggested that this is all basically just a big mistake. Maybe that's whistling past the graveyard, or trying to save face on behalf of the Iranians so they can back out of this. The Democrats in the media, meanwhile, are pushing a narrative, and the narrative is that this is all President Trump's fault, that Trump is the one who has escalated this situation. Number one, is that true? And number two, isn't it a bit of a dangerous game for people like Nancy Pelosi to suggest that it's in the power of the United States to de-escalate a scenario that Iran is clearly escalating?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely 100% the case that Iran is responsible for this escalating situation here. Iran is the aggressor. Iran has launched a series of attacks on shipping passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran continues to sponsor an array of terrorist organizations across the Middle East. Iran has intervened militarily in Iraq, Syria, in Yemen. Iran is a monstrous threat to the entire region, which is why all of the Gulf states are rallying against Iran and siding with the United States. I just find it incredible that there are some U.S. politicians who blame America instead of blaming the world's biggest state sponsor of terror, which is 100% responsible for the current situation. And the United States simply is responding to a clear threat. The United States is defending its allies. And the U.S. has a very clear goal with this maximum pressure strategy of reining in Iran's ambitions in the region. And U.S. leadership really does matter at this time. And I think we should be thankful. We do have strong, robust U.S. leadership in the Middle East right now. And hopefully the leaders of Iran, will come to understand that the United States is not messing around here, that the U.S. is fully capable of doing whatever is necessary to deal with the threat that's in place.
So,
and the blame lies fully on the side of Tehran here.
So, Nile, what exactly has been the reaction of the Europeans to this? So the New York Times had a piece today talking specifically about how Iran's strategy basically here is to carve off the Trump administration from the Europeans. The Europeans obviously have been much softer on Iran for decades than the United States has been. Much of the European world was very upset with President Trump for pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. In the first place, there are members of European governments who have been involved in helping to open pipelines from Iran, including Gerhard Schroeder, the former prime minister, former chancellor, rather, of Germany. So what exactly has the European reaction been to all of this? Is the United States on its own?
Well, it's very mixed, actually. So on the one hand, you have the British government has largely sided with the United States. You've also seen a deployment of British Royal Marines actually to the Gulf. About 100 or so have been sent out to the new British naval base in Bahrain. On the other side, you have the French and the Germans who are still in appeasement mode with regard to Iran, and then of course the wider European Union as well. But I do think, though, that even the patience of European governments is wearing thin with Iran, especially with Iran's threat to increase uranium enrichment in violation of the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And so I do think that European governments are starting to wake up to the reality that the Iran nuclear deal really is dead in the water, and they have to decide whether they wish to side with Iran, a country that hates everything the West stands for, or whether they want to side with the leader of the free world, the United States. And so it's a very clear-cut choice. Some European countries, especially the likes of Great Britain, for example, are siding with America. The usual suspects in Paris and Berlin have been, still siding with Iran, and that's very sad. But hopefully that will change actually in the coming weeks.
Okay, well, Nile Gardiner, we'll definitely check in with you as things develop. Nile Gardiner is director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. Really appreciate your time, sir. And,
My pleasure.
Thanks for the updates.
Thanks very much, Ben.